Yeah, so my name is Emily Pearson Ryan. I've been working as an herbalist for a handful of years after a lot of years of just having it be something I did because I loved it, to take care of my family and my friends and people I'm close with. And I'm just really happy to be here. I feel like I was saying to Stephanie, so grateful for the efforts that went into having this many people. That's really such a gift for me to just show up and like have people excited to learn. Yeah, so I would love if we could do some brief introductions, share your names. If you like sharing pronouns, please do that. And maybe just if you want to name a thing that comes up that brings you here, or that you carry here with you, a question or a worry or a story or something. It doesn't have to be detailed. And I'll maybe just let me know too if you've been at the previous offerings in this space, just so I have a sense of like, I know Stephanie's told me some of what those classes have entailed, and it'll help me like have an idea of where people are at. So, you want to start?
My name's Haley and my pronouns are she.
I wanted to, I don't know a lot of the history of this particular place, but I do know that this is a place named for a little boy whose life was taken way too young. So I just want to thank this place for being open to us being here, being open to me being here, sharing what I know, being open to being a place where something gets built over time with like lots of hands and lots of history on this land for lots of years before that too. Again, that isn't known to me, maybe is known more to some of you, but I'm just thanking this place for being willing to grow these plants this summer so that we can get to know them, so that we can find some ways to heal ourselves, heal our communities. So I was gonna have us all move over there, and I think that can be optional, but I will encourage it because I do think just like touching the plant.
Yes.
So the kind of plan for today is to get to know this one here, and then that one back there, and we'll spend less time with that one because we're gonna kind of work with preparing this one, and then that one we'll just go over. But yeah, if people want to come on over, this plant, I'm gonna have to bring my notes or I'll forget some of it. This plant has more different names than any plant I work with. The Latin name is Monarda fistulosa. And there are like a number of different Monardas, and historically a couple of them get used for medicine. And then there's some division, like, this name is more for this kind of Monarda, this one's more for this. But overall, if you get to know this one by smell, like this is a plant who is easiest to know by the smell. You don't have to eat it, you can. You'll also get to know it by taste. But if you get to know this one by smell, that's the easiest way to know that you're working with the plant, that you've learned a little bit about, and that and that the medicine's in there. Like that smell tells us the medicine's in there. So you understand wild bergamot.
I call it wild bergamot.
Yeah, which is a pretty common name. I use the name sweetleaf, which is a name that comes from my teacher's teacher's teacher. But sweetleaf is a word that gets used for other plants in the world, and so like I know that's a confusing one. This plant also gets called wild oregano, and then the other variety of this one that has the bright, these flowers next year, all of them are going to come up and be lavender. But the other one that gets used for medicine has bright magenta flowers, and those ones are quite beautiful, and that one gets given more commonly the name bee balm or Oswego tea because of the Oswego people who, on the East Coast, who use that one medicinally. So anyway, a million names. And so if you get confused about the names as we go, I'm going to try to stick with wild bergamot because that's what you were using to advertise, and like let's just try to be consistent. So people who are comfortable, interested, if you get down close and like borrow a little leaf here and pinch it between your fingers and then give it a smell, or like roll it between your fingers. Like this is a plant that again is just so easy to get to know by
And it tastes
smell.
good.
And the taste is the same. If a little, have you tasted this
Yes,
berry one?
spicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like minty.
And give a little, like pinch the leaf right there and smell, and you know it tastes plain.
Oh, okay.
So it's like just a really sweet thing, I think, to like get to know the smell right away.
Nice.
So this plant is a mint. And I can like talk a whole bunch, and I will talk a little bit about all the ways that this plant gets used. We can move back to our table. Name that like a lot of the information I'm getting is coming from my teacher, Lise Wolf. And she studied with a person who wrote this book, Matthew Wood. And they both together studied with a native healer named Tismal Crow. And a lot of the teachings about this plant, I think, come from Tismal and his people. And then also this book, which is a highly recommended book, is called Plants Have So Much to Give Us, All We Have to Do Is Ask. And this is the author recounting the knowledge that her mother received from a traditional Anishinaabe medicine woman named Kiwa Dinokwe. And so she also has a lot to share through that lineage about these plants. So Tismal Crow, what he says, like he talks about the essence of this plant, and basically he just says, sweet leaf is a remedy to draw out the fire. And that's really the only thing to like, I think, kind of, if you remember one thing, this is a plant that'll draw out the fire. So then you can be creative about where that might be helpful. He says burns and heat from fevers or infections are its specialty. It seems to open the pores of the internal organs as well as the skin to remove heat or draw out fire. So the way I like to think about this, I have a story that I like to tell about this one because I think it helps illustrate it. And probably a lot of you have had this experience, but it's Halloween and I'm ready to go out trick-or-treating with my kids, and I'm at a friend's house, so I'm like using her kettle and I don't know how to use it. I make a cup of tea to like take on the road. And I pour the kettle and the top comes off and the steam just like scalds my whole hand. I think it's actually my right hand. Scalds my whole hand. And so I do what I've always done my whole life, which is put it under cold water, right? And I do that for a while and the kids are yelling, it's time to go. So finally I just like go outside and it feels fine. And we trick or treat, we're like out there for 3 hours. Maybe we went to a party afterwards. And then 3 hours later, I come back in and I walk into the warm house. And as soon as I walk into the warm house, the hand starts hurting again, right? Like the heat is still there. Or maybe I went to like went to the bathroom, wash my hands in the warm water. It starts burning just as badly as it burnt before. And so the idea around this plant, around what was happening there, is that when I put cold water on a burn, I'm suppressing the burn, right? Like I'm pushing the burn down into my skin. I'm not feeling it, but it's not it's smoldering. I'm like not putting it out. And so what this plant will do in that situation is it almost accelerates that burn so that it burns out quickly and then does less damage in that way.
Does it,
so
does it hurt really bad before it goes out if you do the plant on it?
My experience is not that it hurts more.
Okay.
Which is not, is this paradoxical idea, and we find that kind of throughout all the like uses of this plant, is that like Matthew Wood says that it's a remedy for paradoxical tissue states, which like is kind of a big idea if you're like, working as a practitioner, like identifying what a paradoxical tissue state might be. But like, I think the easiest way to think about that is with this example of just like we have a burn on our skin and the hot is bringing out the hot. So this plant, and I'll pass this around now. This is dried flower. Actually, I'll pass this around and I'll also pass these around. These are just some images that I printed. Interesting to recognize. I've got a couple copies. My printer was overzealous today. Is that? Oh, that's the one you already. Whatever. And then this is a jar full of dried flowers. And then, like I said, like once this plant flowers, the flower really is the strongest medicine. So mostly, people would be harvesting the flowering tops, like the leaves, but maybe the top 6 or 8 inches, or maybe a bit more, 4 or so, when it's in full beautiful flower. So the way that I use this plant, 98% of the time I use this plant next to my stove for like a minor burn. And so the way that I do that is just to spray, like, again, like I had to break, the hardest part was breaking the habit of running to the cold water. And I think probably what happened is that I was somewhere where we didn't have running water, but I did have a bottle of that, and I saw it be really effective, and then that helped build the like trust in the thing. But once I got over not running my cold water under, or my burn under cold water, then I think that like, it's just one I've tried to keep on hand for spraying on a burn. It's also particularly good for sunburn, which kind of makes sense, right? Like this again, the same idea, like the sun's burnt you, and all the cooling things we, presumably when you get sunburn, you're also really hot because you've been at the beach, you've been sweating, whatever, and so we really just want to like bring that out instead of pushing it into the body. So a couple of stories just to like illustrate that, or that I had a friend who was drinking like a cup of hot broth, so it was like a lot of fat on top, hot, like oil. And they took a sip and it just like scalded the whole inside of their mouth. But like spraying this in their mouth had an instant impact to clear that. And then this was actually like the camping story where I found there was no cold water. I had a friend who picked up the grate from the camping stove and it was scalded and burnt like all of her fingertips, and was just worried like, okay, now I'm gonna be now I'm gonna have these burns to tend to the whole time I'm out here in the woods with no running water, et cetera, et cetera. But we had this on hand and she sprayed it on, and within probably 15-20 minutes was just back at her work. So and then
an antibacterial cream or something better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think because part of what it does is it's gonna like, it seems to prevent blistering. It seems to like move. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's also a scar tissue remedy, and I think it does kind of like. I mean, again, like if you picture the way fire works, and the way that fire. Like some things burn quickly, and it's those smoldering ones that are harder to put out and maybe eventually cause more damage because of it. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I think about it anyway. So then I think like, again, that's the large majority of like my experience using this plant is for first aid. Hi, welcome.
Hi, sorry.
Briefly read like a great big list of like internal ways that this plant is helpful, or conditions that this plant is useful internally. And I think that if you can kind of like keep in mind burning for these two, because again, it's the same kind of medicine, right? Like it's conditions where there's either deep infection or deep irritation, and so somewhere in the body something's kind of burning, and this allows the body to move it out.
Like heartburn?
Maybe be worth trying. I mean, it's a mint, right? And so the mints do kind of calm the I'd say.
I don't know, because heartburn is just like, acid reflux. So I don't know if that's necessary tox.
Well, I think it sure could be helpful for that. Yeah, I think that's a good intuition, and I mean, the funny thing, I was like doing a plant walk recently where I kept saying like, oh, and then this is good for appendicitis, and there were like just a couple of people who kind of assumed that I meant that like you don't go to the hospital, just take this, which is never what I mean. So like a lot of these are historical uses, which kind of points us to like how the plant works or is helpful. But also I think it's it's good to be prepared, right? Like we don't always know that our hospitals, that our healthcare systems are accessible in the way we need. And even if you end up with appendicitis and do get to go to the hospital and have it dealt with, you could bring this one along and it still might be helpful. So that's one of the kind of traditional uses, pertussis or whooping cough. So again, just like deep-seated heat that needs some help moving on. And I guess maybe I should clarify like deep-seated heat, but if you've ever seen a kid or an adult with whooping cough, like they also get really kind of sallow looking, like just kind of cold and clammy and like just not very vibrant. And so it's again this weird paradox of like there's some heat somewhere, but it's like making the whole body kind of cold around it. So yeah, so appendicitis, pertussis, snake bite. This is a traditional remedy for snake bite. Also tuberculosis, which again, like, you know, all and none of us ever have to deal with, but it's a helpful thing to like think about, just kind of this deep-seated infection you can't get rid of. Syphilis and gonorrhea, urinary tract infection. This is useful for urinary tract infection still today in people I know, even when rounds and rounds of antibiotics are just not doing what they used to do. So that's a really useful modern remedy still.
As a tea, you take a tea
Yeah.
for a urinary infection.
You surely could. Yeah, you could for sure use dry or fresh in a tea, a strong infusion. To taste, it can be pretty strong. You could also use tincture, which we'll talk more about later, like different preparations or different infusions, but for sure tincture on the tongue. Yeah. And it also makes a good topical remedy for things like yeast infection or foot fungus, diaper rash. Again, these kind of conditions, like if you think about like a stinky fungusy foot, like where it's sweaty and kind of damp, and it's just like the fire to kind of change that condition, burn that situation out. And that would be like, you could soak your feet in a tea at the end of the night, or you could spray some on there before you let it dry and put your sock on. Really, I feel like kind of there's no reason, like if it feels like, oh, I should try using it this way, like do whatever comes to mind, because this medicine will carry into all different preparations.
Herbs that I would be like,
Yeah.
Do that one.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
just got
Yeah.
stabbed by a wasp 5 times last week, and
Oh,
yeah, been learning the hard way
About what to
yeah,
use.
about
Yeah.
what to use.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a sure way though. No, for sure not.
So one of the things my teacher taught about with respect to scar tissue, though, is that people have used this plant. People with a family history of Alzheimer's have used this plant as kind of a preventative or just general like boost to their health. And the idea there, right, is that what Alzheimer's is this like buildup of plaque in our brains. And so if you think about like scar tissue and just buildup of tissue that you don't want there. Now this isn't necessarily a plant you'd use every day, like in big strong doses for the rest of your life, but like, if you know somebody with a family history of Alzheimer's, that might mean that this is a good person to use this for burns. It just might mean that's a person who's well matched with this plant. So it's just a thing to consider. And then also just worth considering is that this plant is useful for ear maladies, and specifically tinnitus or tinnitus, ringing in the ears, and vertigo. So like these kind of hard to affect conditions. I've definitely seen people get very quick relief from ringing in the ears from a very small dose of tincture, like just by mouth. Yeah, speaking of which, huh? Yeah. And we'll start like working with the medicine is just that also traditionally this plant was used in like an emotional or like as a remedy for the heart and for the spirit, for nervousness, for anxiety, for grief. And the way that I think is real sweet to think about this is I had somebody in here like described it as a good household remedy, because one, it's except for, actually should have said this earlier, except for pregnant people, like this is not a good first and second trimester, and that's true of a lot of strong like antimicrobial spicy herbs. So, but aside from the people who are in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy, again, like even the very littles can use this plant. And so it's a good household remedy. And so when there's like discord in the household,
just even spraying this around the room, or like putting it in a kettle and just like letting the steam go all, you know, or pouring it in the soup or whatever you're gonna do to mix that in. I like thinking about it doing the same thing that it does to the burn, right? Like there's heat, and we have all sorts of things we can do to suppress that heat and make it seem like that heat's not there, but this plant can, like, on an emotional and spiritual level, do the same thing that it does on a physical level, which is like help the heat to move out, to dispel, and to kind of restore a more authentic kind of like equilibrium there, instead of just pushing that heat in. Okay. So that's like the quick and dirty version, or maybe not, of like everything that I know about this plant. And Stephanie told me that those of you who've been here to the other classes had already made a tincture of lemon. I'm gonna try, and when Stephanie told me what everybody had already been up to, I wanted to offer something at like kind of the next step. And so I almost always put tincture, and this is like really hard to hear. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, good idea.
Do you like gravity that sometimes
I'm not worried about it. That's not their standard. A tincture is plant material in usually alcohol. And I make almost all of my tinctures in vodka. So I made this one for us to use today. I made this at a farm in Northfield that has an herb farm, like an herb garden in it, a you-pick herb garden. I went there on July 6th, so almost, or more than 2 months ago. I put the fresh plant, just like this, but in flour, into the jar. I shoved it in there, and then I realized I hadn't cut enough, so I stuck a rock on top to like push it down. But then I poured 80 proof vodka on top, and all I did was put it in the dark and waited. So this is the very same that those of you who were at the lemon balm class, or I'm sorry, the yarrow class, did it more or less. You were there? Okay. Anyway. So 6 weeks is that how long you wait? 6 weeks is kind of typical, like at least. But if I didn't have the reason to decant this today, it could sit in my cupboard for 10 years and be totally fine. It's nice to decant, like I think it does kind of, I don't know, saves you the work, it's ready. But you can wait that long, and it's not gonna, as long as the plant material is sunk all the way down, so like maybe I'm breaking my own rule there, but like as long as it's sunk under the vodka, the medicine's good. And so part of the reason that people use vodka or alcohol is because once it's decanted, that you keep this your whole life. It'll be useful for decades. As long as it's not in a dropper bottle. In a dropper bottle, the like rubber on the inside of the cap will eventually start to go bad. But if you put it in a bottle with a lid where the tincture is not touching the lid, for like a lifetime supply, you know, unless you go through it. But kind of in the spirit of like offering something a little different, I also today have the same plant. This one came from my front yard, but on the same day, oddly. And I just soaked this one in vinegar. So I have not ever, I've made vinegars out of like nettle because they taste good, or other plants that might be delicious. Like a lemon balm vinegar might be nice, but I made this as an option to be used maybe topically or in the mouth, the same way you'd use tincture for people who don't want to use alcohol. So we have these two to decant today. And then the third thing I tried, which was also not my norm, but it is a thing people really get into, is I used glycerin. Do you know what glycerin is?
I think it's it can come from animal or vegetable, and I think it's like a fat.
This is derived from non-GMO soybeans. So it gets used in skincare products. It's sticky and sweet. It also can be eaten. Yeah, this is organic vegetable glycerin. But it's sold, it's food grade, but it's sold as a skincare thing.
So I don't understand exactly where glycerin comes from, but I do know that a lot of people like infuse glycerin with herbs and then add it to a face cream, or infuse glycerin with herbs and then sell it as a kid product because it's sweet and vodka is not. So like if you're wanting to make a remedy for children, I use very, very small doses, like maybe 3 drops of something, and so I will give my kids the alcohol based. Other people use much bigger doses, and then maybe you'd not want to do that with a kid. And so glycerin's nice. This is for straining. And I might. But I've definitely also used old tea towels or, you know, any kind of.
So it's just to get the liquid out and keep the.
That's all we're doing. Yeah. Yeah.
You want someone to pull?
Yeah, would you? That'd be great. Thank you. Do you want to come in here?
Is that a funnel? Is that what that is?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
what I have with each of these is the cheesecloth, which I think that'll be enough, but you know, if it was like very little pieces, you would maybe want a little bit finer. But we'll just do like that. And so, and a funnel. And then I have some jars that I already made. So this is the tincture jar. So all you're gonna do is take the lid off. Yeah. And then
Take out the rock.
take out the rock. Yeah, thank you for remembering there's a rock hiding in there. If you
What if all the minerals from the rock infuse into
it's a good question. I do sterilize, like I boil for 20 minutes everything, but more just to kind of like break the like, you know, if I want to use that rock, right? That's a perfect circle.
It's a vodka rock.
It's a good vodka rock. So that guy will go in the sink, and then somebody will look at it and wash it with the rest of the dishes. So then, let me think how to describe. I usually will put it over the top of the jar. I didn't bring rubber bands. Sometimes that's helpful, but if you just hold it tight and kind of start to pour, and I'll hold this so that it's not too tippy.
No, no, no. Just watch.
I bet we'll do it. Yeah, you got it. And I am a little worried we're not going to have a big enough jar. And if we don't, what we'll do is we'll pour off of this into some smaller jars and then keep going. So that is like one of the challenges that I haven't sorted out yet, is guessing, like this is 32 ounces of jar here, but how much vodka got put in, you know, like how much vodka, and then the liquid from the plant does go into the mix also.
Does it turn yellow now? How was that yellow? Or was that,
Yeah.
I just think that's yellow?
Yeah, actually, that'd be nice for
it's
the
yellow.
clear.
Can she like swish it down with a spoon to get more of the liquid out of the plant?
Yep, what we're actually gonna do is like dump it into the cheesecloth and like
there
really
we go.
get our hands in it. So I'll quickly pour a few ounces into these so that we can, you don't have to worry about overflowing.
So we can mix it over ourselves, spray it in our mouths, on our bodies if we get
But
a
it's
burn.
vodka though. Oh yeah.
We don't want to overly spray.
I mean, you know, it's 1 ounce total, so I was like, you know, if you were desperate.
Yeah, they're out. I want to
Spicy.
They are hot too.
Yeah, it would be. I think probably a whole ounce of this would be pretty upsetting to like
Oh yeah.
to a stomach, or
Yeah.
have some sort of.
Yeah, so there's too much that you can take, right? It would be like
anything.
not die, but
Make
you
a
feel.
stomach ache.
I bet you would.
bad.
Yeah. I bet it would get to you if you took the whole bottle at once. I mean, depending on who you are, right? But I'll do 4. Or why don't we keep going? I bet we're good. So once it kind of, you can probably at this point just put the whole thing upside down, or do you feel like it's mostly drained?
I'm not. I guess I can give it another.
I'll just keep going. It's not important that we get a lot out this way. Like it's, yeah, no, we're good. We're good. So now if you take the cheesecloth and lay it over the funnel, we'll actually just dump, and you'll probably need to use your spoon or your fingers to do it, but we'll just start kind of piling it in there. And you'll probably do about half, and then we'll squeeze, and then we'll do the other half and squeeze. Yeah, it's tender. Okay.
A little bird messenger.
So then I'm gonna like fold that over and just start pushing.
Oh, there's not a lot. Oh, there's not.
Yeah, not a ton, but it's the strongest stuff.
It's from
So yeah, because it's the you'll get a thicker color from the stuff you're really squeezing then. And then once you feel like it's mostly done, you can just add more and then keep going. I didn't bring anything to put the mash in.
We can film it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm gonna look at it.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, how far away can people smell that the wild bergamot? I have to pause still to, like, remember the word we're using to talk about this now. So that's wild bergamot, our fabulous burn ally. And now we have to, like, leave all that information in its own package, because we're going to move on to a different plant, but we're not going to talk about that plant for that long. Where are we at for time?
We're thinking we're asking for 37.
Okay, yeah, we're going to be quick with Boneset. Stephanie, I think, I think I left my notes over there, but there's like a whole list of like, dengue fever is not a thing of the past, but it's a thing of the past here, right? Or, south of here. But it really was like, the viral infection was common in a lot of them, but it really was about this like, I think I mentioned this earlier, but it is like a snake bite remedy, is used for snake bite. And so again, like, just the conditions that kind of rack your body.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really useful idea, that it might be helpful for
Yeah, it's
opioid
just like
withdrawal.
when you're saying it, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
like, oh, I've heard people who have been in recovery say how,
Yeah.
their bones hurt.
Yeah.
Literally, that's
Yeah.
what they talk about. Is
Yeah.
like the achiness that they have that they can't like.
Mhm.
There's no remedy other than drugs. You know?
Right.
The only thing
Right.
I would add to that though is I don't think Boneset is good for long-term use.
Right.
No.
So if they were like going through kind of like a longer term rehab,
Yeah, this is, I don't quite know how, I don't know exactly what to recommend, but this is considered a helpful herb for that. And I don't know if it would be like a very small dose, like a drop or two a day for a handful of weeks and then taking a break, or, I have less insight into like how to use it for that, just because it's more of like a toning. Like there are herbs that you just can take every day and they're tonics, right? Like they just strengthen the body overall. And this one isn't that. Yeah, but I do think the way that I work with clients is I test pulse. I test their pulse. So I feel the drops on their skin, and then if the pulse calms down or slows or gets more gentle, that seems like a good remedy. And if it gets stronger, then maybe that's not a great remedy. And so it would be interesting to use that tool, but also any kind of intuition might work in the same way, to feel for somebody who is at risk of osteoporosis or knows they have it or suffering it, so you might try it for a week and see how you feel, and then maybe take a break, or use it around the full moon every month or something. I think you could do something like that, but again, it's just not a easy herb to use in an ongoing way.
That's the next word.
Like ongoing use, right?
What's
It's
that?
got specific uses. It's not really for like you said, strengthening, general strength.
Well, the way that wild bergamot is considered a panacea by some people, it's some people's go-to for everything.
Yeah.
I don't think that's probably true for anybody with this plant, but this plant is really useful in these
like you said earlier, they could do a bunch of stuff, but they have one true virtue.
Yeah. Well, and again, I brought little bottles because I just kind of want it out in the world, but
but also as a reminder that it's strong medicine and it's like, you know, to use in small doses. Yeah. Wants one, or if you have someone else, like a grandma you think should have one, just in case. And just make sure it's labeled, or if it doesn't, add a label, and I'll pour more if I need to. So. So if you don't have